Hey, you're going to love the podcast today. We're dealing with some really wonderfully complex, complicated, and controversial content. We're dealing with the whole notion of, is it ethnocentric? Is it a violation of cultural pluralism for Christians to come to another country and to share the gospel and to preach Jesus and to teach the principles of the kingdom? Is that something bad, or should we just keep our hands off other cultures? This is a big topic, and today you're going to hear a story of an incredible real-life transformation of a primitive headhunting tribe that has now been absolutely transformed simply by the introduction of biblical principles. You're not going to want to miss this podcast.
Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
Hey, we never take you for granted. We are so glad that you're listening in. There's not a week that goes by that I don't hear somebody make a comment about something they listen to on this podcast and express their appreciation. We hope it's helpful to you. It's helpful on from our vantage point on the larger cause of cultural transformation and saving the republic and keeping America strong and God-centered, which is a lot of work. But anyway, we're glad that you're watching, and we hope this is helpful to that end. First of all, I want to thank our brand new wardrobe consultant that we just recently hired with the big bucks that we're making from this podcast. You know, we're actually looking really good with
a collar shirt.
And the gray, yeah. You're looking especially sharp. And none of this would be possible without
almost in comparison to what I normally
our
wear.
wardrobe consultants. And your wardrobe consultant is probably your wife. Does she have any say in how you leave the house?
Normally no, because I leave the house before she's up. But today, yes.
Yes. So she has some input. I like it.
I put the shirt on because I was a little cold downstairs in the basement. So here's a shirt, has a collar. So.
Way to go, Debbie!
Yeah,
all right.
So,
I know this is going to really help the ratings on this show. Of course, I'm always looking good, but to get Andrew up to speed, I appreciate that. Way to
I'm
go,
a T-shirt type of guy. It's a Living Stone T-shirt underneath.
I noticed. I was kind of guessing with the red.
Yeah, but it's a little chilling here, so I kept the.
Well, I'm impressed, and you're looking good. And you always look good, by the way. I was just messing with you. But anyway, we're, as always, we're talking about issues that matter. And I just want to remind you all that issues that matter are always controversial because truth is always contested. And truth is dangerous to the enemy. And so whenever we're speaking the truth about issues, it's going to be controversial. And I can't think of anything more controversial than the whole understanding of mission and really, the chapter in our book that we've been going through, the chapter was called "Can Stone Age Tribes Help Globalization?" And it's an amazing story of a headhunting tribe in modern-day Myanmar, between Myanmar actually and India in the jungles, who experienced radical transformation. We're going to get into the why behind all of that. But this whole topic of Christianity and the gospel and evangelism and missionaries and all of this is incredibly, of course, out of step with modern culture. We're called every name in the book for simply trying to take Jesus or take the gospel to other countries or other cultures and suggest that maybe something in their culture may or may not be good for them or right or true.
Yeah, the idea of culture appropriation, imposing your culture on somebody else, has been seen such a jaded and biased light. Okay, so the story I share, I think I shared this before on this podcast, is when I was in graduate school, I went to lunch with a lady, a young student. She's also in graduate school, medical school, and she graduated from MIT, a good school. And so we're just chatting. She's like, "Oh, what did you do before you came out to grad school?" I was like, I was a missionary in Taiwan. And she just, without missing a beat, ripped into me. Oh, I just think it's so horrible that you go to another nation, impose your culture and your values on the boom, 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 boom. I'm like, wow, you don't know me. You don't know my history. You don't know anything what I did.
Yeah.
But because of this framework,
yeah.
Right, and because I was not worldview trained back then, I was kind of like, I was tongue-tied. Again, it was a cordial conversation. He just turned on the dot to be aggressive. And I didn't expect that. Now, if that happened to me today, I would have simply said, culture appropriate, opposing your viewpoint on someone else. Kind of like what you're doing to me right now.
Exactly.
You, without even knowing me, you have no idea what I did. And you have no idea the compassion and the hard work and what we try to do and what we try to share. But you're just throwing your ideas upon me. I feel a little cultural appropriation right now upon myself. Like you are being a hypocrite right now.
And this is such a teachable moment. I'm glad you got to it because I was going there in my own brain. The very thing she hates about what she thinks you're doing, she's actually doing.
Right.
She's violating her own standard of righteousness because she's suggesting what you're doing is imposing your views.
Right.
And yet she seems to be imposing her view very strongly on you at that very moment. And you didn't ask for that or welcome that. You were blindsided by it.
Right.
So again, that's just the blindness of some of our worldviews and the way that we.
But that's how the higher education. That's how they see all these. That's how they see mission work. I don't even say mission work. Any type of taking your culture, expanding, exporting your culture. They see that as, Western civ, the white man bad thing, going across other culture, oppressing small tribal group. You see it in Hollywood all the time. You see it in movies.
So she's just reading off her liberal script from MIT.
It's whatever
Ivy League schools.
Without any real critical thought. Because, there's a lot of bad things that happens in this colonialized idea of coming to your nation and telling what to do and taking over and burning stuff. But there's also a lot of good. This is actually a very gray area that requires critical thinking and really unbiased thought. But she, even though she graduated from this highly elite college, was never afforded the opportunity to be able to do that. So she jumped to conclusion.
And so this chapter, I think, gives us a good opportunity to talk about the nuances, because we usually create straw men and arguments, and then we kill the straw man, and we're like, look, aren't we smart? But the straw man is an oversimplification and a caricature of our position. And so we really need to deal with the nuances. So let's unpackage this story. We get introduced to a guy, his short, he has a beautiful Indian name, but the short version is Ro, R-O. Ro's the hero of this chapter. And Ro is a member of the headhunting tribe, the Hamars, in northeast India. And he's a Christian now, and this is kind of talking about the transformation of his people. But he says, and maybe this is a good point to start with, he said, every single culture has goodness as well as baseness or badness, and that we should be focused on transforming the negative aspects of every culture. Now, those statements are laden with certain assumptions, but let's just talk about this. From a Christian worldview standpoint, any nation you go to, if you look around, all truth is God's truth, you could find aspects of truth in those cultures and aspects of those cultures that should be celebrated.
Yep.
And then you can find other aspects of culture that are like, that's wrong. Like you and I have talked, for instance, about Asian culture and the shame and performance and some of those kinds of things. And American culture has its own set of evils, gross materialism, licentiousness, perversion, all the stuff that's greed, all these things that we're dealing with in our culture today. But you could go to every single culture and just see the beauty. When we go on mission trips, for instance, I love being part of the Church of Jesus Christ, finding its expression in all these different cultures, because the worship is unique in Latin countries or African countries, Asian countries, compared to maybe what you see on Sunday morning in an American church. But there's a beauty to it. The food that we enjoy in all these places. I love going to India because of all the beautiful colors and the femininity of that culture in terms of the ladies. They're always dressed in very, what I would call feminine ways, colorful ways, beautiful ways. And so you look at every nation of the world, and you can see good things and you can see bad things. Yeah. But even that's a value judgment, because we get into
saying that.
What is good?
Right.
How do you define good? What is bad? How do you define bad? And so he goes on into saying that that these fierce warriors, the Hamar people, beheaded 500 British soldiers in 1870. They would decorate their huts with the heads of their enemies. And so just starting right there, I guess we would ask an amazing question. Like, in a world of religious pluralism and relativism, is what the Hamar people did in their culture of chopping the heads off of their enemies and decorating their homes with the heads, is that bad? And if it is, what criteria do you use to call it bad?
Right.
And this is the challenge of modern, quote, higher education, is you find yourself being unable to make any kind of moral judgments about anything.
Well, but they still do. And they make moral judgment all the time. And that's where things get messed up, because you make a moral judgment when you pass a law. You make a moral judgment when you're teaching worldview in its colleges. You're making moral judgment everywhere you do. So fundamentally, the idea of this colonialism or pushing things, value on other people is neutral, because everybody's doing that. By you, this professor is teaching. We're doing it right now in this podcast, right?
Everybody's arguing for truth, even though some would argue that there's no such thing as truth.
Yeah, he's still arguing. The truth is that there is no truth, which is contradicting itself. But the point is, there's still you can't avoid it, right?
Right.
So, but the key is to argue the validity of this truth versus your truth, or whatever truth you think it is. But no one wants to do that. You just want to say, well, you people, because of your skin color, or because of your religion, or because you're blah blah blah, you don't get to do that, but we get to do it.
Right.
And that's what's happening.
You're the dominant culture, so you don't even have an opinion.
You shouldn't have an opinion,
because you're racist. And he talks about here imperialism, basically one culture dominating another culture. We would argue stridently that nobody should be imperialistic in terms of domination. The goal is not dominating. The goal is elevating and blessing and lifting. And, as you said, we've had people in the name of Christ who have been guilty of dominating. And that's not a biblical value at all, even though it gets tarred and feathered as you Christians.
Right.
But everybody who has the name Christian doesn't act in the name of Christ or follow the scriptures, and so imperialism is wrong. But let's talk about this. This is a word you run into if you take sociology in school, or psychology. It's the phrase ethnocentrism, thinking your culture is better than another culture. Now, this is a nuanced phrase too, because if I'm sitting here going, yeah, you Asian people, you guys stink. We white folks, we're the best. We Americans, we're better than you Asians or whatever. Then that's ethnocentrism. It's a ugly kind of prideful thing. But we are saying that there are some aspects of culture in one culture that actually lead to better results than the behaviors of another culture.
Well, I want to make a bold statement. Like, Jesus is ethnocentric. He's saying the culture of the kingdom is better than all their kingdom. That's what he preaches. He's saying the value. Now, again, he says with ultimate humility. And he says with great love, because he wants to elevate others. But again, he's making a value. Evangelism, John the Baptist, when he said, repent for the kingdom of God is near, he's making a value judgment.
Right.
He's saying that.
At the same time, not to interject, but so what did Jesus spend most of his time doing? He's dealing with the ethnocentric views of the Jewish people, suggesting that they're superior than, say, the Samaritans. How many parables does Jesus tell where the hero of the parable was somebody that they despised ethnically and looked down upon, considered their culture, superior than the evil, yucky Samaritans or the Gentiles in general.
Right.
So you're exactly right. Jesus was constantly dealing with racism and ethnocentrism on a human level, but he presented an alternative that was better.
And that's why this is a nuanced point. It's like what you think ethnocentrism is related to because you think you're racist, superior, and whatnot. But if it's just simply about your culture, you can't, if you don't think there's a better viewpoint and there's a better culture, there's nothing to say. There's no value to be given. What you elect with is like, I'm going to just let them be them. I want to be me. Then there is no mission. There's no persuasion. There's no teaching. There's no communication.
So let's talk about that, because you're talking about cultural relativism, a belief that culture should be judged by their own standards. So let's take the Hamar people. Yeah. They practice violence against their enemies. They behead them. It is an incredibly, violent culture. Should we take our Western standards and then say, hey, you guys really shouldn't be running around chopping the heads off of other people? That's not nice. That's what a lot of progressive liberals would do. That would be their approach today. But if you're truly a cultural relativist, then who are we to impose our Western civilization, democratic, Christian, progressive, whatever label you want to use, any of our views on them? They should be able to determine in their own culture what's good and what's evil.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, I remember you were talking about your college days. When I was in grad school, I went out and taught a class on ethics at a state university. And I said, how many of you think Adolf Hitler's a great guy? Well, of course, nobody thought he was a great guy. How many think what the Nazis did was admirable and we should follow their example? Nobody. I said, well, why? And it got real quiet. And then somebody said, well, Hitler, slaughtered innocent people. He murdered innocent people. And I said, you're saying murder is wrong? Well, yeah. And then I said, well, why? Aren't you imposing your values on Adolf Hitler?
Right.
And who are you to tell Adolf Hitler that, what if Adolf Hitler felt like what he did was right? What if the German people felt like that was culturally appropriate for them to do what they did at that time? Who are we to tell them that they were wrong? And I said, so why is murder wrong? Silence, this whole lecture hall, silence. Right. And I said, let me tell you why it's wrong. Because God says it's wrong.
Right.
And because God declared it was wrong, and because you're living on the fruit of a Judeo-Christian ethical system that has taught you since being a little child that murder is wrong, but it's because God declared it to be wrong.
So this is interesting because that whole group of classroom students, right? If they don't believe in God and they don't say murder is wrong because of God, they're guilty of ethnocentrism because they're saying my culture, my exclusive culture, my opinion, my tribe is right to say murder is wrong. It's like, how dare you say that your culture, your belief is better than someone else's belief? But when we recognize, hey, these cultural values did not come from our tribal experience, but came from God. Now it's not about your culture. Now it's not about your ethnocentrism. Now it's about a transcendent value that's bigger than me. So our connection to the Word of God and to our faith in God's command, revelation to us, actually free us from this kind of racist idea that you're just simply better than one. No, we're all the same. Right? And Jesus came to say, yes, our culture, the kingdom culture is better than all your culture.
I came to give you life and life more abundantly. That is a bold statement about the kingdom and about the transcendent values that Jesus came and preached that transcend all cultures. So I love this. So we recently went to Honduras with our wonderful friends there and did a marriage conference. And I always like to, when I go to different cultures, I like to preface the statement by saying, I'm not teaching you an American view of marriage, just so you all know. I could care less about an American view of marriage.
Yeah, we're not doing so great here for our marriage.
Yeah. We're teaching you a kingdom view of marriage from God's perspective. Therefore, the principles we're going to read apply to all cultures. They transcend all cultures. In other words, this is the plumb line, or this is the standard by which you judge what marriage looks like and whether marriage is lining up with a plumb line of God's truth. And our assumption is if it does, if your marriage lines up with God's truth, you're going to have a great marriage. If your marriage doesn't, to the degree that it's off to one side or the other, you're going to struggle. It doesn't matter what culture you're in, what God says about marriage transcends culture because it's kingdom. And that's why, we're preaching, of course, on the Kingdom series right now, and I encourage our listeners to go back if you're not able to be with us on Sunday. Go back and listen to that because this is really the foundation of our message of the gospel. It's about the king and about the culture that the king creates. And so ideas such as imperialism, ethnocentrism, cultural relativism, cultural pluralism, all cultures are equally good and true. And the accusation that Christians, this is another good one, Christians are exclusivistic. In other words, we actually believe our way is the right way, therefore shame on us. Once again, the person who says shame on you is being just as exclusive as they're accusing us of being, because they're saying my view is condemning your exclusivistic view.
Well, I say Jesus was so convinced that he's the right way. He brings the correct way. He's not going to budge, that he actually died. So, talk about conflict in terms of two opposing views that's saying we have the right way. The Jewish leader says, our way is so important, so sacred, we're so ethnocentric, we're going to kill you. And Jesus says, my way, the kingdom of God, is so right, so true, and our culture is so perfect and so worthy of it, I'm going to lay my life down for it.
Absolutely. So he puts his money where his mouth is.
Yes,
he backs it up.
He is being exclusive. That's not joke ourselves. Jesus wasn't saying, you just do whatever you want. No, he died because he's saying, no, there's only one way. He is being exclusive.
And so the opposite problem that he points out, he says, okay, we should be concerned with imperialism, dominating another culture. But how about this? What's equally evil is indifference. So he looks at his people again. He's speaking personally here from someone who lives in that culture. He says these people, the Hamar people, were living in poverty and squalor. Alcoholism was rampant, poor hygiene, terrible sanitation, terrible nutrition. Illiteracy was a massive problem. Domestic violence. The Hamar people were spiritists, so they worshipped the rivers and the mountains and the rocks and the sun. And the problem was, again, they're getting no compassion from Mother Nature, because Mother Nature is not a person. And so they're living in these harsh environments, disease, sickness, worshiping basically demon spirits. And he's saying, are we not able to at least show these people that there's options? Like, we don't have to come in and say, you're going to be this, or we're going to now punish you if you do such and such. But can we at least come in and educate these people and show them that there's a different way to live? Like, you can actually, there's better nutrition than what you're currently experiencing now. There's a better way of life. Now, you can choose whether it's better or not. In other words, we're not forcing this. It's not, right. It's not at the end of a bayonet or right. a gun. But that's the purpose of educating people, so that they can learn and have options about how they want to live. Right. And so indifference, he says, is a terrible thing. And I just want to bring up right here, there's a lot of this Rousseauian thought, especially in higher education, that somehow the native, quote, native people left to their own, living in harmony with nature, that this is some pristine, awesome, beautiful way to live, and that we shouldn't come in and ruin their way of living. I remember we were talking about the movie Dances with Wolves back in the day, that glorified this Indian tribe, and of course made the Westerners look like terrible, terrible people. But the whole idea was they were living such a simple lifestyle, one with nature. That is a horrible, horrible myth. We're talking about disease, the demonic, everything that the enemy brings as part of false religion was a part of these people's culture. There's nothing pristine about it. And that is a myth that needs to be exploded. So anyway, he brings up the question, how should we educate these folks? And he deals with the liberal naivete that, we really shouldn't be proactive. Let's just let them watch American television, and they'll pick up the American and the Western and the democratized way of life. Of course, there's a few problems there.
Yeah.
They don't speak English. They don't have TVs.
Yeah, they don't have electricity. So
they don't understand our
right.
way of life.
Right.
But it's kind of like the hands-off, laissez-faire, they'll get it approach of liberalism. And he highlights, he goes, they need to be educated. But the problem is, who in the world is going to volunteer for that job? Hey, we've got this tribal people. They love to cut their enemies' heads off. They worship right. demonic spirits, and they're really looking for a good kindergarten teacher.
Right.
And the pay's not really great, and the conditions are pretty rough.
You got to hike hundreds of miles or whatever, tens of miles to get in there.
Who wants this job? And he basically made the point that this required missionary heroism. In other words, the only people willing to take up that task, because these were kind of a no man's land people.
Right. The British Empire kind of left them alone.
Yeah, nobody claimed
them. What? We don't want to fight these guys.
The Hindu people wouldn't touch them because they were in an untouchable lower caste. Islam required that you learn the Quran, which is in Arabic. So imagine going to these tribal people who have no written language, and now you have to teach them Arabic before you can educate them. So that didn't work. And so I love this story, and in the time that we have left, we'll try to cover it quickly. But in 1909, the Gospel of John was written and translated into the Lashai language, which is the tribal language. And somebody delivered to the chief's hut, kind of like Amazon delivery boy, a New Testament or a Gospel of John in their language, and it turns out it was a man by the name of Watkins Roberts, a businessman from Wales, who sent this Gospel of John to the king's hut. And when the king received this book, although he couldn't read it or understand it, he realized somebody took great pain to getting this book to him. Therefore, the contents must be really, really important. And so he sent an invitation out to the author. Yeah. Who was willing to go, even though the colonel who was in charge of the military colonel who was in charge of that area, said, "That's way too dangerous. Don't go. We can't afford the troops to send
we can't send you all the troops to protect you."
And he disobeyed the order, and he went. And it was beautiful because he shared the gospel in a way that they could grasp.
Right.
They were a militant tribe fighting their enemies, and he talked about two enemies who were at odds, who had a history of violence, and how a blood sacrifice on behalf of the past and the sins of the people and forgiveness. And he talked about all these biblical constructs, and then he applied it to Christ and what Christ did to reconcile us to God. And this message was incredibly received. He promised that he would come back and explain in more detail, and
build
then
schools and stuff like that.
Yeah,
right?
And then the British told him, "Sorry, you're expelled from the country for disobeying."
You can't come
order.
back. Right.
So he was never able to come back. But this man, Roe, who was the son of one of the leaders in that village, when he was just 10 years old, amazing story. His mom and dad said, "You must go and to school because you need to translate the Bible into our language. This book is so important. We need to know the principles in this book." And it was like a 96-mile walk
it was
through the jungle.
Like a 10-year-old, right?
A 10-year-old with pythons and jaguar. But the point was this, like, who would send their 10-year-old through 96 miles walking through a jungle? Well, if you believe that book contained the truth that could transform your culture, you would be willing to do that. And that's exactly what they did. So the story goes, he came to the U.S., went to some great schools, got some great training, and he goes back. And this is pretty incredible. After 10 years of his return, he began starting schools. After 10 years, 85 schools, a college, and a hospital, all founded without any government help. What a legacy. So this man went back with a man on fire, with a translation of the gospel in their language, and began literally, as he shared the truths of the Bible, saw this headhunting tribe. All of a sudden, every measurable point of health begins going off the charts. Everything starts changing because of the truth of the Bible. And this is incredible. Today, 85% of Hamars can read. Compare that with India's overall literacy rate, which is at 60%. So here, a group of tribal prehistoric people who were backwards as can be by biblical standards, steeped in demonic worship. Now 85% of them can read, and their whole culture has been absolutely transformed. Yeah. What a story. And all of that happened because of the Bible. Right. And I like some of his principles. He said, what good is the mind if you educate the mind, but you don't educate people morally? And he gave the example of Nazi Germany. They were some of the most highly educated people committing some of the
brilliant scientists,
most heinous crimes. Right. So he started, I love this, they tried to shut down his university. In fact, he did close the university because they were demanding that they conform to certain secular principles. And here's a principle he shared, which I think is so apropos to American higher education today. He said, young people must have intellectual freedom to pursue truth. We don't have intellectual freedom in most public universities in America today.
No way,
to pursue truth openly. We're handed a script of what to believe. And he was willing to shut down that university on that principle. Another thing I loved is he sent his Russian friends Bibles from India to every zip code or in the phone book in major cities. Everybody's getting Bibles sent from India into Russia, which I thought was great.
Yeah, because he recognized how reading the Bible changes culture. He's seen it firsthand, right?
Yeah, and Westerners would not be able to do that, but because of the relationship between Russia and India, he was able to do that. And some other principles just to highlight as we wrap up. He talked about teaching Indians how to love your neighbor as yourself, to get out of the caste system. Again, we should be preaching this in America today with all the racial divide. Love your neighbor as yourself. He said the pen is mightier than the sword. Ideas rule the world. Ideas create culture, and the Bible liberates nations. And so, again, powerful, real life, real history, real people, real time picture of how the ideas contained in a book, namely the Bible, can change the world.
And all because this white Anglo-British business guy came and imposed his values on this headhunting tribe.
And I love it. That would be the way it'd be interpreted. But
Right.
but he simply introduced ideas to them. And you know, in America today, we have so many people that are afraid of ideas. They shut down. They don't even let you articulate those ideas because they know that a mind that is open to truth can be transformed. And I've always argued this podcast stands by this. The gospel is truth, and it liberates people, and ideas have consequences, and the consequences in the Bible, when read and understood and embraced and practiced, change your life personally, they change your marriage, they change your family, they change your community, and ultimately they change the world. Right. And that's the power of truth. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And so we just need to keep striving for an environment where we proclaim truth, where we stand with conviction, where we're not, Christians have never been, the whole basis for religious liberty is not, I'm going to shove my religion down your throat. It's, true religion has to be embraced by the heart. It has to be willingly embraced. It can't be forced on people like radical Islam under the threat of death or whatever. You have to have the freedom to have a smorgasbord of ideas, and then allow people to wrestle with those ideas. And again, I always say the proof's in the pudding. What is the impact of a lifestyle that's lived in accordance with this worldview versus a lifestyle that's lived in accordance with this worldview? What produces better outcome?
Right.
And what corresponds? Truth used to be defined as that which corresponds to reality. Like there is reality with a capital R. Like you could say, for instance, I choose not to believe in gravity, and you can pretend like you can fly and jump off a skyscraper. But at the end of the day, you're going to figure out whether that was a true belief that corresponds to reality or not. Because as you're falling, 100 stories and splatting on the ground, you'll probably come to the realization shortly before you hit that, and maybe gravity is real. So that was the point of higher education, is let's strive after what's true, because what's true will conform to what's real. And if we live according to what's real, then we can order our lives accordingly and live good lives and blessed lives. Mm-hmm. But we've lost that whole discussion. And I think this chapter makes an argument that, the power of ideas is really, really amazing. And we must never give up on articulating our Christian worldview.
Yeah, and being unapologetic to say, no, we are imposing our value, but we're not doing it with a sword. We're not doing it with force. We're not doing it with pressure and guilt. We're doing it in a coherent, clear way to communicate our views, just like we invite you to communicate your views, like you say.
Absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely.
That's okay to persuade others of the truth. That's okay.
Absolutely. In fact, it's our mandate. So I just want to encourage all of our listeners again, the greatest weapon we have is the Bible. And sometimes we get accused of, using our Bible as a club. The Bible's not a club. The Bible's a love letter. It's an introduction to this amazing God that we have. It's an introduction to kingdom principles. And we will unashamedly testify everywhere we go that wherever the gospel goes, people get blessed. Their lives are changed. Their cultures change, their marriages are changed, their economy changes, everything changes when the idea of the Bible are introduced, embraced, understood, and practiced. And so we got to start right here at home, because we're losing the game here at home, not because we don't have the answers, but because we're not proclaiming the truth.
Yeah.
So let's do that boldly. Stand for Christ in the marketplace. Many of you are working in the marketplace, and that's your ministry. Unashamedly and winsomely share the gospel every chance you can get, and don't be ashamed of the good news, because it's the power of God to save and to transform. So until next Thursday, thanks again for tuning in. We'll look forward to being with you next week.